So today you are here to understand some general principles about nutrition and about food. In general, we want to know how to reduce the tendency of our society to develop chronic disease. Chronic disease is associated with inflammation, and therefore when we talk about chronic disease, we always talk about inflammation, and we need to look at our lifestyle and decide what is it about our life that makes us more inflamed. What is it that makes us more chronically predisposed to illness? In order to learn what it is that makes us ill or makes us sick or makes us age prematurely or have chronic illness, we need to understand what we have done to our body over the years, since back in the days when we were still in our primordial environment, which was nice and clean and unpolluted, long before the Middle Ages, long before the Roman period, long before the Greek Empire. Go back, long before the caveman's diet. You have to go long enough into the history of humanity to see what our physiology is actually intended to get into it. What are we supposed to absorb? What are we supposed to ingest? What does nature tell us to eat? What people have done back 300 years ago is irrelevant. What some Aztec has been eating 400 years ago in Peru is irrelevant. Although it could become an excuse to sell you something today, the Aztecs have eaten it. What's 400 years ago? It's nothing. If we use that logic, we would also be eating whale blubber all the time if we want to emulate the Eskimos. And we'd eat nothing else besides whales and blubber. Obviously, we don't follow them, so why do we follow the Aztecs so much? Why do we have to follow the Japanese? They're also very short-term existence within the island of Japan. Why is it relevant to all of humanity? It is a short-term, localized tradition. What really interests us is how did our body really obtain its nutrients in nature? Because as soon as we depart from that natural existence, that's when we start seeing a tendency towards inflammation and a tendency towards chronic disease. Now we have a whole discussion about paleoanthropology, which I will not do in its entirety today because it's a 5-hour discussion. Paleoanthropology. What humans used to eat long before civilization, long before the advent of agriculture. That's when our body was still in its natural environment and we had no choice but to eat what nature wanted us to eat. Now there are people who talk about the paleo diet, the Paleolithic prescription. There are some scientists who realized correctly that we should be eating according to some time in the past. And they are telling us to eat according to our Paleolithic history. The paleo diet, they call it. But how do they decide what we should really be eating? They did not investigate what people ate back in the Paleolithic period. Instead, what they did was looking at Aborigines today and averaged them out. So they looked at indigenous people in Australia, in Africa, the Eskimos, and other people who still live a fairly primitive existence. But this primitive existence could be just 200 years old, could be 300 years old. It's still not ancient enough. It's primitive by comparison to what we modern westernized people consider modern, or considered up to date. But it is not relevant to what humans used to eat. So what they did is they took those Aborigines and said they ate 30% of their calories from flesh. And they take the Eskimos who eat 80 or 90% of their calories from flesh. And they take another group, some Native Americans, who ate 45% of their calories from flesh. And they took all three groups, or four groups, and said, well, 85% here, 35% here, 45% here. Let's average them all out, and according to that, humans have to have, say, 50% of their calories from animal products. Can you see how illogical it is? Yeah. To take groups of people who are basically making a living through survival. They're trying to survive. They are not reflecting on what humans were supposed to eat back in their days in nature. They are basically justifying eating a lot more flesh than we ever have eaten. And even the types are not the same types. They are telling us some correct things. They say you have to avoid dairy products because until agricultural period, nobody ate any dairy products. And even until more recently, dairy products were never on our table. Therefore, instinctively, intuitively, using the precautionary principle, we should know that just going all out to drink the glandular secretions of other mammals and the other products coming from that, just precautionary principle would be enough to tell us let's not do it until until this experiment is actually concluded. Until we have real good data, it is irresponsible to tell everybody that they need to have dairy products, especially when we know about enough studies showing that there are very strong suspicions about what the dairy products do to us. We have to be very cautious. Yet, everybody eats dairy products, and if you go to the Paleolithic prescription, you will be healthier because you'll avoid all dairy. But you will be eating 4 meals a day, at least, with flesh. Almost every meal of the day has flesh items on it, because they averaged out all of those indigenous people who are not representing our life in the tropical forest. They represent a temporary adaptation to drought, to the desert, to the ice in the Arctics. That adaptation does not have anything to do with longevity, thriving, and health. It is just good enough to survive long enough to bring another generation or 2 generations, and that's it. It's as if you take all of those people and look at what they dress and say, according to what all those indigenous people dress, what they dress today, we should average their dresses up and dress that average. So we should all have this Cossack hat and grass skirt. That's the same logic. We're averaging out those clothes when we know that in nature, what kind of clothes did we wear? None. We would be naked in nature. So we want to go naked again with food. We need to go back to those days when our food was the same as our clothing, completely natural. That is the best analogy I can come up with, and I just came up with it just for you, right now. Don't believe the ethnic interpretation of diet, because ethnics are nothing more than the creation of new dogmas or the decision to follow other people that are living today, as if that's an indication of what we need to be eating, just because they are closer to nature or they are more primitive. So they do some things better. Obviously, we don't want to have refined flours and refined sugars. Obviously, we don't want to have artificial colors and flavors and preservatives. That we should all know, even intuitively. But beyond that, we need to decide what we really ate. And for that, we have to look at our physiology. And for that, we have to study paleoanthropology, which precedes caveman's diet. Even caveman's diet was not the diet of people in the tropical forest. When people already end up in the cave, they had to adapt. They were not in their natural habitat anymore. Therefore, what they ate there is no more beneficial or relevant to us than what the Eskimos are eating to adapt in their environment. If you understand that, you will never believe anymore what you read from the paleo people, who will tell you all the time more and more animal foods. You cannot believe it anymore. You understand now the logic in, the flaw in their logic. But what about the physiological reasons, not just the anthropological ones? How do we know that in nature we did not have that much protein? Definitely not that dense protein. How do we know that? Just by looking at our physiology of the digestive system. If our gut had been exposed to protein all the time, if protein were so prevalent in our digestive environment, we would not be trying so hard to absorb it, because it would be so easy to obtain it from the environment all the time. We see that with other types of foods, like B vitamins. We don't have to spend any energy on absorbing them, because B vitamins are so prevalent in our food, in our natural food, that our body doesn't care if it doesn't get all the B vitamins that we ingest into the circulation. It doesn't matter. There's always enough. The same is true with carotenoids, beta-carotene and other carotenoids. There are so many of them in dark green leafies, we don't have to try so hard to absorb them. Whatever comes in is fine, it's always enough. Our physiology is never lacking those unless we eat extremely refined diets. So we have enough of these foods, and we know we had enough when we are not expending energy to absorb them. With regards to proteins, or more accurately to amino acids, we know it's not the case, because we spend a lot of energy to proactively obtain every amino acid that we have ingested. And that is by itself sufficient proof to the effect that amino acids were always scarce in our environment. We did not have that much coming into our mouth. We had a very small amount of protein that we ingested every day. And that amount was so small that our body knew it had to expend energy to proactively take in those amino acids and bring them into the circulation. And until today we have that physiology, which means we didn't get much, and what we did get we absorbed. Today we are getting 10 times more, or 5 times more, or 3 times more. Depends on who you are and how you live your life. But even if you're getting just 3 times more the protein, you're getting 3 times more, or even more than that, the toxicity that associates with ingestion of excess of protein. Because every amino acid that enters your body in excess will still be absorbed, since our mechanism of absorption is still there. Historically, it remained within our gut. And that's why we get so poisoned. If we take too much carotenoids, a lot of it will not be absorbed, we will not have excess, because it's a passive absorption. If we have a lot of minerals, because in nature we had plenty of minerals in our foods, today you can have a lot of minerals. What will it cause you to have? Diarrhea. Because the minerals will not be absorbed, they will stay, if there is excess, in your gut, and they will end up in your stool, drawing water and causing watery stools. That's a proof, again, that our body does not get excess of anything that in nature we did not have a lot of to begin with. It only gets in excess what it absorbs very easily, because in nature we would have a very small amount of. That's a very important distinction. It's true for everything we do in excess. When we take hormones, if we take the hormones by injections, or if we take big boluses or pulse amount of hormones, they give us some benefit, but they also come in too large of a quantity by comparison to what our own body would have done. It would have manufactured them drop by drop, small amounts throughout the whole day, not in small pulses. So we can get some benefit, but we can also have some problems because it's not steady state. Everything that we do, that in nature we would have gotten in small amounts, that we do in large amounts, we're going to ultimately suffer some consequences. And that's the main issue. The protein issue is the main component of our modern diet that is responsible for so many of our chronic diseases. Because it is causing abnormalities in blood sugar, which is associated with inflammation as well, because all the foods that are dense in protein are associated with arachidonic acid, which is pro-inflammatory, causes inflammation, and because the proteins burn dirty to manufacture energy. In order to digest and absorb and utilize proteins for energy, you have to decapitate their amino acids. And those amino acids therefore have to form new toxic compounds such as ammonia before our body can excrete them. That ammonia is poisonous to the kidneys and to the rest of our tissues that have to be bathing in ammonia as a byproduct of metabolizing too much protein. That's why it doesn't matter if you're a vegetarian or vegan or flesh eating. It doesn't matter. What matters is how much protein are you getting. You can be suffering the same consequences if you eat nuts and seeds all day long. If you eat high protein legumes, soybeans, etc. all day long. And a lot of people today who decide to be vegan are buying all those high protein foods, high protein bars, high protein powders, thinking that they are good for them, when in fact they're damaging them. But they became easy to sell because we've all been brainwashed by the cattle industry to think that we need more protein. So that's the number one cause for coronary disease. We have plenty of scientific studies associating protein intake, especially with affluent people in the Philippines, in other locations. The most affluent people who were able in all those primitive environments to have the highest amount of animal flesh and protein, they have the highest rate of cancer. Normally we would expect the wealthy people to be healthier because they have access to food. They will not starve. You'd expect them to be protected because they have better environments. Their houses are more intact. Yet they have the highest amount of cancer, which is one of the indicators for the toxicity of proteins in their diet. Arachidonic acid is not something we should forget, even though I mentioned it earlier. Every food that comes from animal source will contain some arachidonic acid because animals need to have inflammation when they get injured. They have to be inflamed to survive. And that's why we all have, as animals, we all have a little bit of arachidonic acid throughout our entire body. In every cell we have in the membranes around it some arachidonic acid in case we need to get inflammation for survival. Short-term inflammation is crucial for our survival. But if you eat too many animals that produce their own arachidonic acid, then you are eating finalized pro-inflammatory substance. You are making your body far more inflamed than if you manufactured your own arachidonic acid on a small scale on a regular basis. That's another reason why people who eat a lot of animal products have generally far greater inflammation, and they have a harder time healing from injuries. I have to tell you that since I have changed my diet, I have healed from injuries so much faster than ever before. I didn't realize that until I got injured. 20 years ago, 25 years ago, 30 years ago, when I would be injured, it would take me a long time to heal, like most people. Even at age 25, I would sprint, I would run or something, and then there'd be pain somewhere in some tendon that just won't go away for 6 months, which obviously is different from age 15. But once the diet has changed, every injury that I thought would be causing major inflammation and maybe chronic problem disappeared within a day. Just last week, I have a little chin-up bar in a corridor in my apartment, and I like to just sometimes swing from it. I don't really do chin-ups, I'm too lazy. But I like to sometimes swing. You know, I feel like a monkey sometimes, so I just jump on the swing and just go swinging back and forth until my body is completely parallel to the floor on both sides, right? Just for fun. But I didn't realize when I jumped, from afar I ran and jumped and held it and went all the way with my legs forward, and I didn't realize that there was oil on that chin-up bar. It was so oily that I slipped, my body was parallel at this height, and I fell straight down on the floor, hardwood floor. It was so noisy. When I hit, it was much noisier than when you hit the swimming pool water when you fall on your belly flat. But I fell on my back. It was so strong and so hard, and from such a height, I was sure that I broke a few ribs and maybe even the spine. And my head hit the floor at the same time, basically the whole body. And I thought, that's it. I'm going to be in a wheelchair. It was just a week ago. And, you know, couldn't breathe for a while. You know, all the air came out, and I was stuck there, not being able to move. And then a few minutes later, I got up and started moving, and I had lots of pain and headache, like a whole zinger went through the whole spine. And I was really worried. But within 2 hours of significant pain, it suddenly started subsiding. And by night time, almost all of it was gone. And the next morning, that was it. Totally gone, all the problem. And I know that if I didn't have my diet, I would stay inflamed for a lot longer amount of time. That's how it is in nature. You're supposed to be inflamed for a short time to heal. A short time, assuming that you don't break a bone. But once that inflammation has done its job, has given you some pain, some limitation of movement, so healing can take place, then you want to eliminate that inflammation. You have to, in order to be able to keep moving, running, fighting, so that you could survive as a species. We cannot afford to have inflammation for any length of time. Yet what we do is we go to all kinds of doctors, chiropractors, physical therapists who tell us, oh, now you are in the acute phase, next will be the subacute, next will be the chronic. And you assume that you will go the whole route to chronicity. And in most cases you do. Either because of the prediction or the therapy that accompanies it, or because your body is so inflamed, you have so much arachidonic acid and so much toxicity from excess protein, from ammonia, and from various nitrogen-free radicals. Nitrogen-free radicals are very tough for our body to handle. Very difficult for us to generate antioxidants that will quench those free radicals called nitrogen-free radicals. They occur when you have a lot of nitrogen in your food. Everybody who has high nitrogen in their food is likely to be susceptible to some type of a condition. For example, climb the Himalayas with me. Come to Nepal. You climb up the mountains and you develop altitude sickness. But if you avoid excess nitrogen, you will not have altitude sickness. You can go as high as you want and as fast as you want. I have proof from various groups that went with me to high altitude in a short time. Nobody gets altitude sickness anymore because they avoid excess nitrogen. Athletes too are aware of it. That if they have too much nitrogen, they will be toxic and they will not have good performance. That's why they do carb loading. That's why they build up the glycogen in their liver, and they're afraid of having too much nitrogen. They know how tiring it is to the system, how energy draining it is to have too much protein and its attendant nitrogen, which also leads to increased inflammatory response, because another form of nitrogen is participating in nitric oxide. Not only nitric oxide is associated with another potent free radical, but it also is associated with dilatation of the blood vessels, which we see with nitric oxide ingestion, or food that increase nitric oxide, or drugs that do that, like Viagra. Your blood vessels dilate, but if you have a slight inflammation, what is that dilatation leading to? To leakage. When blood vessels dilate, you can have a much greater leaking of fluid into the tissues. And that increases the inflammatory response. So even if you're supposed to be healing faster, you can't, because fluid are built up. The more fluid builds up in your tissues, the more inflamed you would feel, and the more restricted in movement, the more limited you would be. And the more fluid there is in your tissues, your detoxification capability will diminish. So that is a very important part. High protein diet is not what our ancestors did in their natural physiological environment. Of course, other things that we eat today that have been processed in one way or another are affecting our health as well, and increase chronic disease and inflammation. We eat things that we think are natural, but in nature we wouldn't have had access to them. We eat a lot of grains and legumes and seeds in big quantities that in nature would not be available to us. And we eat them every day as if in nature we would have had access to them every day, when in fact most of them we had access to only very rarely, or infrequently, or annually. So we eat chia seeds every day suddenly because somebody tells us that chia seed is a superfood. Or we eat hemp seeds every day because somebody tells us that hemp is a superfood, instead of realizing how impossible it would have been for us to collect hemp seeds in these type of quantities, to hull them or dehull them, and eat them in large spoonfuls every day as a supplement, if not as food. That would have never happened in nature. And those are extremely rich, not just with protein, which is very hard on us, as we said earlier, but also with very unstable, very hard to digest fats. First of all, the digestion aspect of it is important. If we eat food that are difficult to digest, or food that are too readily black stomach acid formation, or stomach acidity simply by neutralizing the acid that's in the stomach, that's already the beginning of problems, because bacteria and other microbes can easily cross into the small intestine, where we have very, very little protection. The stomach acid should be protecting us, but if we don't have enough, because we eat food that are too heavy, too dense, and too anti-acidic, such as dairy products, such as white bread, such as white flour, white starch, refined starch, all act as antacids. Those are food that would have never been available in nature. But today they are highly available. They block acid, they make us more likely to get various microbes entering our gastrointestinal system, which is rife with so many types of microbes, many of which are not the ones that we want to grow in ourselves. If you eat more animal products or more food that have been spoiled, the risk that you're increasing some microbes that are not germane to our own environment increases. We know that dairy products contain numerous microbes that we don't want to ingest. Tuberculosis, mycoplasma, different types of pneumonia microorganisms, different viruses, papilloma virus, leukemia virus, and all of those microbes easily accumulate in our gut, in our digestive system, and they cause inflammation because they lead to toxicity. If the gut is not functioning, or if the gut is getting inflamed, your whole body becomes inflamed because of leaky gut syndrome, because of mucopolysaccharides, which are components of the cell membranes of those microbes, which easily enter the circulation, enter the liver, and cause a major inflammatory reaction throughout the whole body. And most of us have a mild form of that inflammation chronically because of our diet and because of the microbes in our gut. If we eat foods that are more plant-based and minimize the animal-based foods, and I'm not saying you have to be vegan, but if you have no more than 5% of your calories coming from flesh, you are getting a lot closer to our ancestral diet, and you will have a much lesser likelihood of infesting your gut with all those microbes that can cause inflammation and chronic disease. We now know from recent studies that at least 90% of the cells in our body are actually microbes. They're not our body. So only 10% of you is you. And in fact, 90% of you is not you, which really means that 90% that is the majority of you is bacteria and other microbes, so you are really 90% them. And they are you, for better or for worse. You can choose throughout your own lifestyle, your own life, if they will be for better or for worse, because your choices, whether you decide to cause damage to your digestive system by eating food that are extremely heavy and tough to digest in large quantities, or eating more flesh, or more dairy products, or more refined foods, or drinking alcohol, or smoking, or drinking coffee, or eating stimulants like chocolate, or eating fructose-rich foods which increase damage to the liver and cause increased inflammation whenever you're exposed to the microbes we talked about earlier, because all of those mucopolysaccharides have to be processed by your liver's immune cells called macrophages. So if the liver is already overwhelmed with fructose, it would not be able to handle the incoming mucopolysaccharides from the microbial infestation, and you'll end up far more inflamed, almost to the point of death. A lot of people have simple food poisoning, simple bacterial infestation, and people think it's no big deal, and suddenly they die. We see that in the emergency room sometimes. People come, food poisoning, and they die. That is from major inflammation, not from sepsis, not from toxins throughout the whole body, but from a severe inflammatory response starting at the liver, which contains 80% of all the macrophages in our entire body. So when they secrete their content all at once because of a microbial infestation that should have never caused particles to enter the liver but should have stayed in the gut, because of the gut's inflammation, because of our failure to protect our gut, our whole body gets so inflamed that sometimes we simply die. Or we can get so sick that we cannot believe it's even possible from just getting some foodborne microbes. If you do the alcohol and the stimulants and the caffeine, if you do all the refined foods, if you always tell yourself, it's okay, I'm just doing it in moderation, you don't have a hope, any hope. Whenever you use the terms in moderation, you ruin your chances for health. Even though it's such a common adage, it's an aphorism, we like to say, oh, I'm doing it all in moderation. Today you do cigarettes in moderation, tomorrow you do dairy products, the next day you do refined flours. Every day you do something in moderation. It ends up that every day you have damaged yourself. Every day you've done something wrong to your body, increasing the inflammation. The sum of all those days would lead to great inflammation. That's why at your own home, in areas that are under control, you should never compromise. You should never buy things for your own home that will increase inflammation and damage to your tissues. Never. Because that's the only place where you have control. And if you want to live something into moderation, it's only for when you have no control. When you go to a potluck. Or when you go to a restaurant with friends. That's when you have to compromise a little bit because they might not have organic foods. Organic food is very important if you want to reduce inflammation resulting from toxicity. So you have to compromise maybe once a week if you go out. But in your own home, you make sure that all you have in your fridge is organic produce that you can turn into food, that will not be refined, that will not contain GMOs. And if you do GMOs, if you have anything with soy that is not certified organic, if you have anything containing eggs that are commercial, and I don't have to tell you what GMO products those chicken are being fed. Nobody should eat eggs that are not organic or free range. If you have to eat eggs at all, to eat actual conventional eggs is evil. You don't know what you're supporting. You don't know what you're getting. Just look at those chicken in those conditions and tell me you want to eat their eggs. See what they're fed. Conventional eggs should not be eaten. Just like conventional soy should not be eaten because of the GMOs. Conventional corn should not be eaten because of GMOs. GMOs change your microbes in your gut. That change leads to ineffective digestion, immune response, leading to damage to the mucosal lining and inflammation. Again, your body becomes overall inflamed and chronically ill. So don't compromise with that. You go to Trader Joe or you go to Whole Foods and you are in a hurry and you get something and you don't even look at the ingredients. Most people who are aware of how to eat healthy are failing to look at the ingredients, and they are saying to themselves, well, it's okay, I'll just have it once. Oh, okay, I'm just in a hurry. I'm hungry. There's always an excuse not to look at the ingredient list. And you allow those people who abuse our food or abuse the chicken or abuse the soy or abuse the earth and the planet, you allow them to laugh all the way to the bank because you did not read the ingredients. And you ignored what you already know that you should not ignore. Everybody knows to avoid GMOs, but are you avoiding them? Are you really avoiding them? Look at the ingredients. I bet you many of you know, but still buy something and the fourth or fifth ingredient just says corn. And you would not think about it because it's inconvenient to think about it at the moment. You already had the product put into your basket, and it's just too much to take it out and put it back on the shelf. You get all those processed, packaged, boxed foods, and you fail to read the ingredients. Why? Why do people ignore the ingredients, even though they know they shouldn't? Because maybe you want to trust that Big Brother is taking good care of you? That the FDA would not allow you to eat anything toxic? That they are protecting you from unscrupulous farmers and food producers? You know better than that. I think it's just plain laziness. And it is also addiction. It's an addiction. The food addiction leads to inadvertent looking the other way. You just don't want to know. You know, when the Nazis were doing their thing, too many people did not want to know. They were not bad people. They just didn't want to be aware of what's going on because it was too inconvenient. And now we are creating a major food-borne holocaust. And we are looking the other way because it's inconvenient. There is some parallel because the human nature is so easily distorted. We distort nature, and our own nature has also been distorted by the foodstuff that we have been given that has caused us almost immediate addictions. Why are we addicted to those foods that are harming us most? I should not ask that question, because the question already has the answer built into it. The foods that harm us most will inevitably cause addiction because they lead to stress reaction. Stress reaction leads to elevated blood sugar. Blood sugar makes us feel high, makes us feel energetic. And then all our life we go up and down with the reaction to that high sugar, leading to hypoglycemic reactivity, and then we feel we have to eat the same foods again that made us feel high the previous time. It's no different from going through withdrawals from a drug or alcohol or caffeine. And we do it with our food. In nature it would have never happened because natural foods do not cause stress reaction. They don't have excessive protein. Natural foods do not have addictive substances which are present almost always in things that we would have never eaten in nature. Look at other animals and you don't see addictions until they are in captivity or until we turn them into pets. Suddenly they turn food into an addictive item, substance abuse. But in nature, there's no addiction. They only eat what is physiologically compatible. Only when you eat foods that are incompatible with your physiology, there's a risk of developing an addictive behavior. We see it time and again. That addiction makes us skim the surface of these long list of ingredients. And that is something I request of each and every one of you. Don't do that anymore. Start reading the ingredients and don't compromise in your own bastion of health, your home. Your own castle has cracks in it. If you put these things in your fridge, you're bound to eat them. If you think, oh, it's no big deal, it's just a little chocolate. Oh, it's no big deal, just a little chicken. There's always a no big deal. But where does it end? How could you ever be healthy and energetic and vital and slim? How could you ever really prevent the evolution of diseases like cancer and diabetes and cardiovascular conditions when in your own home you're poisoning yourself knowingly yet ignoring it, pushing it aside? You don't want to be truly aware of it. Just open your own cabinet and look and tell me how much of it is natural. Look at your pantry. How much of that food is natural? Start looking at the ingredients. And you'll see that one of the chief ingredients in most of the packaged foods, and also in many of the raw foods, and definitely in the roasted and cooked food, is rancid fats. Rancid fats are so ubiquitous. And people buy, I've seen even my own coordinators, they go and they buy stuff, and I'm shocked because they've listened to all the lectures, they know the stuff, and they still buy things with safflower oil after they heard me specifically say in the Truth About Your Fat lecture to avoid these rich polyunsaturated fatty acid oils. Safflower, sunflower, canola, soybean oil. Why are people still eating them? After they have heard it time and time again. Again, convenience. They don't want to spend a little more time looking for the right food that will not have those ingredients. But if they did it once and found those foods, they wouldn't have to do it again. They would know. Instead, they keep buying those foods, and they end up damaged. How do you expect not to be inflamed and chronically ill when rancid fats are altering the cellular structure in your body? When you have so many fats that are omega-6, precursors to arachidonic acid, leading to additional inflammation. When you have so much rancidity that it's hard for you to incorporate omega-3 fatty acids that will be hopefully stable so that you could reduce inflammation. In general, our modern diet altered that ratio between omega-6 and omega-3, again increasing inflammation and chronic disease, and not allowing us to stay in the acute phase and become healthy right after it, forcing us to go from acute to subacute to chronic, ruining our health. So it's your choices every day when you compromise at home that ruin you, because when you are out of your home, there's no hope whatsoever that you will avoid compromising. If it's at your own home you compromise, that's it. You're done for. You're going to be moving towards chronic illness. If not now, then maybe in 5 years. If you're lucky genetically, maybe in 15 years. But imagine how healthy you could have been if you avoided it. You could be 81 but feel like 21. You can. You know, and that's our job to prove it. We need to have a group of people who eat as close as possible to what is natural and healthy, for long term, not just for short term, not just chasing symptoms up and down all day long, but actually having a healthy lifestyle for sufficient amount of time that we could take that group and do some questionnaires and look at their health, investigate what their blood tests are showing, testing all the different parameters that we know we can test, and then comparing that with a group of people who are seemingly healthy, who don't display specific symptoms, but who are not eating that way, and averaging it out. So the groups have to be identical in that they don't have any chronic or significant illness on both ends, both sides. That would be really interesting. Nobody has ever done that, because people always tested sick people. So you don't really know unless you do a control group and a sick group, but then how do you compare the really healthy eating with the non-healthy eating? That's never been done as a variable. They only had healthy eating versus doing nothing. For a person with specific health condition like cardiovascular disease, how do you extrapolate from that to the general population that simply wants to live long, to be less inflamed, and not to have chronic disease in the future? Well, we know what the markers are of chronic disease and of chronic inflammation. If we could only do a test of 20 people who eat that way and have no symptoms versus 20 who eat another way and have no symptoms, and having them more or less the same age group, the same background, Western people who are alike, from a genetic perspective, and seeing who has better parameters, and then challenging their health with some kind of a stress, and see which ones heal faster from injuries. We can even injure them as a part of the study. Just mild injury, and then measure the results, how long it takes them to feel better, with some questionnaires. It should be a very simple study. But we don't have enough subjects doing that. Why? Because none of you eat healthy, even if you claim you do. I don't want to mention any dishes because everybody made a great effort, but one of the dishes had such rancid fats, I threw the whole thing. And I hope that you noticed it. There was one dish. It was at the front of the table. Never mind. It was totally rancid. You could smell it. And if you tasted it, Immediately it was a dead giveaway. You should never have eaten that.
Well, I wish you would have let us know before we
It would have been inappropriate when everybody is so excited about the food. You know, we all hold hands together and somebody blesses us about the food we're going to eat. How am I spoiling that? I don't want to spoil that.
Well, I'd rather you have.
Well, there may be still some food on that plate. I'm not sure. You didn't notice something rancid?
I eat everything. Well, raw food always tastes that way.
Always tastes rancid?
It tastes bitter, so I can't tell the difference.
Yeah, no, this was not bitter. This was as rancid as it gets.
What color was the dish? Orange?
It had several colors.
Yeah. Oh,
I'm not sure where it came from.
Whole Foods is cheating.
But if you are not aware yet of how to taste for rancidity, you are more likely to do that at home. If you are going to roast your nuts or dehydrate them, you will not notice if it's rancid. That's why you might still be damaging yourself and causing chronic disease. So you have to start paying attention, and if you do so, we can then put you in a study group.